Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I am going to do my first shared screen here. See how this is going to work.
Can
Okay.
add that to your very long list of accomplishments. Wow.
Okay. Okay. Do you see that screen? No? Yes? No?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Let me get all the rest of this stuff out. Okay. All right. Just want to get this. Oh, okay. So do you see all this stuff at the top with all that good stuff? Oh, okay. Here we go. Here we go. Look out
Yep.
now.
If you want to go into presenter view, kind of bottom right, there's a little like presentation looking thing.
Okay.
One to the right of that.
All right. Here.
One to the right.
Here. Oh,
Yeah.
slideshow. Oh,
There you
well,
go.
there we go. All
Perfect.
right. Well, good morning. I'm James Williams Jr., Director of Federal Affairs for Wayne State. Thanks. First of all, I want to thank you, Ms. Marusek, and also Ms. Desai. Let me tell you, I am here among excellence today. I mean, Hillary is Ms. Marusek rather, is such a smart leader and organizer, and Ms. Desai is one of the winners of the video award from the Science Coalition. Let me tell you, that is no small achievement. That award is usually won by the Stanfords and the Princetons and the Yales. And so when we're there, I'm going to the meetings and I'm, always pumping up Wayne State, Wayne State, Wayne State. So when Wayne State didn't win just one, just two, but all three categories, that's like winning the entire sweep at the Academy Awards. So, Ms. Desai, you deserve a round of applause. And, that is
Oh, thank you. You're too sweet.
no small part. So look, so thank you for helping me figure out how to get this thing on the screen today. So I just wanted to just go to, hey, look, that's your boy. At the far left, I was 16 years old. In the middle, I was a student body president. And at the right is the more modern picture. But what I wanted to emphasize is that anybody can be an advocate because anybody can serve. And really, the thing about being an advocate is that you have to have the heart and the desire of wanting to do that. We're going to talk a little bit about the legislative process, but I really want to emphasize how important what Poly is doing. The first thing you have to do is to get organized. The second thing is you have to figure out your goals and objectives. And then people like me, that's where we come in. People who know the process, people can help you maneuver through the minefields. Because it's one thing to say, okay, I'd love to have this happen, but it's another thing to, make it happen. Plus, I want you all to see, I wasn't always bald headed. I had a nice head of hair back in the day. And no, the coat in the middle and the coat on the far right, they're not the same coat. They're two different coats. So just in case anyone was thinking. So the key things about Washington, D.C. are very simple. One, you have to learn the process. Learning the process, and I have some more detailed slides that I'm going to leave for everyone that you can kind of use to learn the process, but you gotta know the process. It's, for example, you don't play hockey in a basketball outfit. That's just not gonna work. You have to know the process. And the other thing you have to do is you have to make your priorities Congress's priorities. Congress right now, as you all know, we're going through some of the most tumultuous times in the 243-year history of this republic. Right now we're undergoing the second impeachment, the first time the second impeachment conviction trial of a president. So how do you get through all of that? You have to make your priorities Congress's priorities. You'll often hear powerful as an adjective used before every committee. And I tell this to everyone, the most powerful committee is the one that has your business in front of it. Doesn't matter if it's small business, ways and means, or appropriations. If the small business committee has legislation that's going to eliminate the debt of students, that's the most important committee that you have to deal with. So but you have to make your priorities Congress's priorities. This next one I learned from my former boss, Congressman John Lewis, who, as you know, I served as chief of staff. Mr. Lewis used to tell us this all the time. Protest without policy is just a walk in the street. Your protests must end up in a policy that will make change that you've been fighting for. And you also have to look at the long picture, the long game. Adjust, adapt, overcome. That's something that is often used in the military, but in politics, that's what you always have to do. You know, you'll start off with the plan and then something else will come up. And let me give you a great example of that. Many of you probably remember the Affordable Care Act. So the Affordable Care Act was supposed to go through the normal process. Unfortunately, we had a very small Senate majority back then as well. The lead sponsor of the legislation, Senator Ted Kennedy, died. And then a Republican replaced him. And that meant you had to get 60 votes in order for anything to move along. Speaker Pelosi brought the bill back, went through what we're going through now, the budget reconciliation process, attached it to budget reconciliation, knowing we had at least 51 votes to make it happen, and President Obama signed the bill into law. You have to play the long game. One thing I learned, and I learned this actually before I even became a Hill staffer. My grandfather fought in World War II in the Battle of the Bulge, and he came back and he faced discrimination in Washington, D.C. In 1963, he participated in the March on Washington, and this wasn't some small thing. African Americans who participated were told, "Oh, you're going to lose your job if you choose to march in that thing with that radical Martin Luther King Jr." He did it anyway. And when I interviewed him shortly before he died when I was 17, he said, "I did that." He said, "I didn't march in that for myself. That would be selfish. I didn't march in that for my wife. You know, I marched in the March on Washington for you. I marched in the March on Washington for your grandchildren, for your great-grandchildren. I have all the civil rights I probably am ever going to get." Whenever you demonstrate and try to make a difference, you're always doing it for the next. Sometimes it benefits yourself, but it often benefits others. You have to look at the long game. Why am I here in the first place? The next I got from my late boss, Mickey Leland, and he said, on Capitol Hill and in politics, you have to make friends before you need them. What does that mean? You become friendly, you understand, and you learn issues and differences. All the members who, and I've done this, I do this still. There are members of Congress who are Republican who sometimes, and I'm not, when I go to Wayne State and I represent Wayne State, I don't represent Wayne State as a Republican or a Democrat, but I often understand that sometimes members make difficult votes. In this case, Fred Upton. Congressman Fred Upton was one of the few members of Congress to have voted for impeachment of the current president, and also that this is a constitutional process. And you probably, you're in Michigan, you probably know he's gotten a lot of heat for that. Whenever you see a member of Congress make a stand like that, that's when you need to write that member of Congress. It's kind of like being a parent, you know, positive reinforcement works. And when these members get letters and phone calls, you know, thank you. I might not disagree with you on this, but thank you for that. That's what you do. And likewise, people like Brenda Lawrence, who've always voted in support of more access to education and more research funding. You know, Congresswoman, thank you for being a strong supporter of what it is that we're trying to do. And eventually you all are going to come to Capitol Hill. And I tell people this all the time, when you come to Capitol Hill, you almost kind of have to treat it, now, not that I engage in such behavior, like a one-night stand. You got to get on, get in, get out. You can't be there all night and all that stuff. You have 15 minutes. As a staffer, I regularly got 400 or 500 emails. Then you have votes on the floor. Then you have to go to hearings. Then you have people stopping by. But when you stop by, 15 minutes. And the reason why that is because you want another meeting, because there's going to be something else that comes up down the road. If you're known to come in, you know, every time Ms. Desai and Ms. Marisak come in, it's only, you know, they're in, they're on, they're out, and they leave the one pager and they follow up and they help us make it easy for us. You'll always get a meeting with that staffer or that member of Congress. And that goes to the next point. Follow up. You always have to follow up with a phone call, with an email, and not just, you know, what I want. What can I do to make your job easier? When I worked on the Hill, I told organizations like yours the same thing. The easier you make it for a Hill staffer to do their job, the more likely it is that you're going to get what you want. Bring the, you know, you don't have to bring them a ream of paper, just give them the one pager, but I have all this other information. Whom do you want me to make, to whom should I make a phone call? Where should I direct everything? And lastly, have fun. You know, again, during the civil rights movement, there were lots of songs, lots of dances, people getting together, and just like minds thinking alike. And one of the leaders, one of the organizers of the March on Washington, Bayard Rustin, was a known ukulele player. And during the March on Washington, all of a sudden, all the speakers go out just before King is supposed to speak. So Bayard Rustin starts playing his ukulele and everybody's just singing these songs. And you have to remember, Harry Belafonte was there, Sidney Poitier was there, Mahalia Jackson, all singing these songs. Eventually the speakers come back and, they just had a good time and it was a lot of fun. So you have to have fun during the process because it can be a grind, believe me. Now, this is what we're all looking forward to seeing. That is the how a bill is signed into law. So what ultimately happens, I'm old enough to remember back before cable TV took over, there were these shows that used to come on called Schoolhouse Rock. Anybody remember the Schoolhouse Rock days? So there's one of the most famous Schoolhouse Rock episodes of all time is called I'm Just a Bill. And I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. I won't sing it to you. I know I can sing, but I'm just not going to do that right now. But this is the flow chart that really tells you how a bill becomes law. First you start off as an idea, then it gets introduced in the House. After it's introduced in the House, it goes to a committee, and then it'll go to a subcommittee, and there'll be subcommittee hearings, and maybe what's called a subcommittee markup. A markup is when you actually get a piece of legislation, you go through, you start marking it up, you add, amend, and add and amend. That bill then goes to the full committee, and if it's deemed worthy, the full committee chairman will then send it in the House to the Rules Committee. Now, you never heard of that committee. That committee is one of the most powerful committees on the Hill because they determine whether a bill is going to come to the floor, what are the terms of debate, if a bill will have amended and all those sort of things. And you might see under here, it says, or for important measures, special rules reported by the Rules Committee and adopted by the House. That's called a rule that's under suspension of the rules. So what that means is that a bill can be voted on up or down, just has to get 2/3 majority. Most of them pass by voice vote. Okay, so what's an example of that? Naming post offices, making legislation that sometimes you have technical and correcting changes to bills that were passed before, things that are non-controversial. You get those bills through that. Then the bill is on the floor for debate. And that's a whole other set of rules and regulations. But generally in the House, there are strict rules for germaneness. In other words, you can't add an amendment on the agriculture bill, on the bill that deals with education. And but there aren't, so those animals don't exist in the Senate. After the bill passes the House, then one of two things can happen. It'll either begin the whole process again in the Senate, or if you're lucky, you have bills that are going on a simultaneous path. Then, so let's assume that's the case. Two bills are going on a simultaneous path. Then the bills have to go to what they can then, a couple other things happen. In the middle paragraph, you'll say one chamber agrees to the other chamber's version. And that often happens. Okay, we like the bill in the House, so we'll just vote on that. Or each chamber appoint members and they'll have what's called a conference committee. You have a bill from the House, a bill from the Senate, and then you merge those two bills together. And then after that happens, or you can do what we have on the Hill is called ping pong amendments. They'll amend the bill in the House, send it over to the Senate. We don't like that, we'll amend it. And you go back and forth until you get one bill. But ultimately, one thing has to be signed and completed. It has to pass in the House, pass in the Senate, and it's sent to the president. The president can sign it. That's when it becomes law. If the president doesn't sign it, as it said, in 10 days, and if Congress is in session, it becomes law. If Congress is not in session, that's what happens. It's called a pocket veto. Or the president can veto the measure. When in that case, it goes back to the House where you have to get a 2/3 majority. That's typically around 273, 74 votes. And in the Senate, you need 66, 67 votes in order to have a veto override. But that's the basics of it. I am here to tell everyone here today that if you ever have a question on the process or what's going on, you can call me or send me an email. I have my email and my phone number here as part of this process. So that's an important aspect to understand and remember. How do I lobby the Hill? What do I deal with? These individuals that you see here are members of the Congressional Black Caucus. And my mantra of going to the Hill is no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. So when I go to Wayne State, it can be a majority Republican, it can be a majority Democratic members. What's my goals? Number one, student access for education. How do I make it so that schools, that college is going to be more affordable for students at Wayne State? Number two, research funding. Wayne State is one of this nation's top Carnegie ranked research institutions. You can't do research without federal funding. Number three, raising the profile of Wayne State University. Wayne State University, we're one of three of the university research corridor schools. And my goal is to make sure that our professors, our researchers, and our students are testifying on Capitol Hill. They're positioned at think tanks. They're participating in caucuses such as the Congressional Black Caucus and other caucuses that have health reform, about women's issues and about students. How do we make college more affordable for students this day? So that's what's going on. And just want to point out something about this picture. So here we have two Michigan members of Congress. So number one is this gentleman. I don't know if you see my arrow. That's Charles Diggs. Charles Diggs, who has since passed away, he has the district that is currently held by, roughly, by Brenda Lawrence. And this young man right here is John Conyers Jr. These are the original founders of the Congressional Black Caucus. And this one woman here, Shirley Chisholm, is the first African-American elected to the United States House of Representatives. So having said that, so what are the priorities of Capitol Hill when it comes to college, to what's happening now? Some of them, and this again goes back to process of fast and furious. There's a bill that would increase funding to research universities and colleges that is going through the traditional process. And again, this is where the making friends before you know it comes into play. One of my colleagues, former colleagues from the Senate staff said, James, we think we're moving toward budget reconciliation. Okay, so why is that important? Well, now you see why it's important. I think everybody understands. The traditional budget is introduced February 15th or somewhere around there to the Congress. Then Congress considers it, and then the House will vote on either a budget resolution by August 15th, and then it's sent to the Senate. Sometimes Congress passes a resolution, sometimes it doesn't. It's not binding in law, but it typically tells you kind of like how you have a budget. Well, we're going to spend this much on this, and this. And the most important part about the budget resolution from a Hill staffer perspective is this thing called the 302Bs. I won't go into the details. It's really going into the weeds here. But bottom line, it tells how much subcommittee on appropriations are going to be able to spend. Budget reconciliation, you have to, it essentially is an accelerated process for the budget, but more importantly, you can attach legislation to it that's not budget related, but has the kind of be budget related. Under this thing called the Byrd Rule, if it doesn't significantly affect the deficit, then you can do it. And that's kind of really at the 30,000 foot level. But the bottom line is that's how this COVID-19 funding is coming through. And the bill that does provide a lot of research funding is coming through right now. So all this negotiation that's happening now, we were doing in February, we being Wayne State, Michigan, and Michigan State. We're negotiating with Hill staff, knowing that there was going to be a new transition of power. All the elections have been over. So I work with Senator Peters and also Senator Stabenow's office, because this emanates from the Senate, because we've got a new chairman of the budget committee in the name of Bernie Sanders. This was his first time doing it. So we wanted to make sure that we had money for students, and we also had money for increased research. So far, so good. The committees still have to do their work. Right now, the committees, I know there's an impeachment on the Senate side, the House is in full session, not voting, but the committees are there grinding all this out because the speaker says she wants this done in 2 weeks. We have to get it done. And that's a lot of work, and it's a lot of things but that's what's going to happen. But the priorities for the Congress for the 117th with regard to Wayne State, one is the RISE Act, but number two, I wouldn't say number two, but the number one is the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act of 1965. It has not been reauthorized for 15 years. That means you're not able to see an increase in Pell Grants. You're not able to see an increase for work study students. You're not able to see an increase or a decrease in the amount of loans that students have to take. And putting this into perspective, when I went to college back in the 40 pounds in the afro ago, in my case, when I went to college, my Pell Grant covered 85% of my tuition at Fisk University. The rest I was able to do in work study. Yeah, I worked when I was in college for 4 years at a restaurant, but most of my tuition was paid for. When I was a student at the University of Maryland, the Pell Grant back in those days, if you were a state student, for example, you're at Wayne State, University of Michigan, Michigan State, the Pell Grant covered 100% of your tuition at those schools back then, 100%. That in the Pell Grant today is an abysmal, I think it's about $6,000. The Congressional Black Caucus, the chair of the Education and Labor Committee is a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. He's pushing for the Pell Grant funding to be over $18,000 per year. And also legislation that we've been pushing in the budget reconciliation, we hope to get it to over $12,000 per year. That's what we're pushing, but that's part of the reason why, process and all those sort of things are important. But that's the number one priority is the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. Number two is this RISE Act that we've fortunately been able to get in budget reconciliation that increases funding, increases federal commitment for funding, research, and students. So those are the two big things that we're moving forward. And Hillary, I'll be sure to send you the details on all of those afterward. I don't want to take too much of your time here, but okay. So this next thing, I'm not going through all of these, but when I started out on Capitol Hill, I had 10, one of my uncles who was still living from the Vietnam War gave me 10 rules of Murphy's Laws of Combat. And I'm sitting, how the heck does this have anything to do with me? I'm working on Capitol Hill now, Unc. And one of the things that I've cited, I can't tell so many times, one is the diversion that you are ignoring is actually the main attack. If that isn't politics, I don't know what is. The important things are very simple. The simple things are very hard. The only thing more accurate than incoming enemy fire is incoming friendly fire. There's more, but I have this on my wall today. I've had it in my on my Hills stand, in my little carry-in that I had on Capitol Hill, and it was very helpful because really these rules are going to help, I think, you as you move forward in advocacy. So I brought up to you earlier how important organization and students are. Students are young people like you are the leaders that are going to make change that happen. That picture of me back when I was a student body president, I was 21, 22 years old, and I already gotten arrested one time demonstrating against apartheid in South Africa. I organized buses of students to demonstrate against the fact that the then Reagan policies had slashed the Pell Grant. And I bring that up because, what's important to understand in this picture, you see John Lewis and Hosea Williams. They are leading this march here from Selma to Birmingham, Alabama. If you don't know, the people of Alabama, Black people, did not have the right to vote. John Lewis, at the time of this picture, was all of 23 years old. He had been arrested over 40 times. And this march was so dangerous, Dr. King said, I'm not participating in it. Well, I think all of you know, Mr. Lewis, as a result, had his skull fractured and he was imprisoned. But as soon as he got out of prison, you see him here right now with another icon of the civil rights movement, James Foreman, whom they were still busy planning, because one thing Mr. Lewis knew is that this is the long game. This isn't anything that we're going to get now. And Mr. Lewis ended up living to 80 years old. Now I'm gonna wrap up here, but I want to point this out because this is part of what I'm talking about, the long game. I don't think many of you recognize this lady right here. You may not, but she was a mother and she had 5 children. And she was outraged by what was going on in Selma, Alabama, too. And so she organized a group of people and they drove down to Selma, Alabama, and she participated in the second Civil Rights March. So she ended up going down there and she drove some civil rights workers home. She ended up being killed. And she's the only white woman killed in the civil rights movement. Her name was Viola Gregg Liuzzo, and she was a Wayne State University student. This plaque is in the law school pavilion that hangs in her honor. And Mr. Lewis remembers her personally because he, of course, was part of the movement. I just put this out there to say that because of young people, this is the only way change happens. As a voting registrar and political guy, I tell this to young people all the time. You're 30% of the population, but you're 100% of the future. If change is going to happen, it's because of you. Don't let some old guy like me decide Pell Grants aren't important or student loans aren't important. I don't think that. So I'm just using that as a metaphor here, as an example here. But really, that's what it's all about. And it starts off with organizations like this. And to get things started, somebody has to put it together and make it happen. Mr. Lewis people will often ask Mr. Lewis, what can we do? He'll say the same thing. What can I do? He'll say, get organized, vote. Don't be bitter. Don't get angry, because anger is, as he used to say, and I agree, one of the most wasted emotions. You have to always be hopeful. I have to always be optimistic. And the big thing I said regarding the long game, this isn't the struggle of a day, a week, a month. This is a struggle of a lifetime. Mr. Lewis fought for civil rights up until the day he died. And civil rights are human rights. And that's the same thing that's going to be here. All of you, this is the start of your experience. Mr. Lewis used to always tell us, people now look at the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Housing Rights Act, not just that, but Medicare, Medicaid, immigration reform, as if things, they were going to happen. No, they didn't happen all by themselves. They happened because young people got together and said, we are going to make them happen, which goes back to one of my first slides. You have to make Congress make your priorities. Don't come in there, Congress, please, we want you to, can you please consider this? No, we pay your salary, our taxes go to your coffers. This is what we need. And that's the attitude you must always have. It's not easy. It's never been easy, but it starts off, and you have to have a face for the long game. And I just want to end up with Mr. Lewis. This is Mr. Lewis standing on Black Lives Matter Plaza, dying from pancreatic cancer. And one thing that is typical of him, that's typical of all of you, you're all young, you're all energized. You just have to be organized. You have to be focused. With regard to the process and procedure, I'm here to help you. I promise, Ms. Desai, and I promise you, Ms. Marusak, that I will keep you informed of what's going on the Hill. If you hear anything, you have my email and my phone numbers attached to this piece a little bit later. And I've got more details and all that. I'm not going to waste your time with all that. But that's what we have. And so, in the words of Mr. Lewis, if you see something that's not right, that's not wrong, you have to stand up. You have to get in the way. You have to there's bad trouble, but you always have to get in good trouble. So that's it. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. That was fabulous. And you're an amazing speaker. And I always say this to all our speakers, but I look up to you guys because I think all of us here, we want to have this energy and ability to inspire others. And that's exactly what you did here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now I'm trying to get, do you all still see the picture? I want to get out.
Yeah, let me stop that for you.
Okay, there you go.
We do have an audience question for you that I will ask.
No problem.
Joseph Ganna is wondering, what are some important environmental justice legislation that is being considered in Congress at the moment, and how can we use it to maximize the benefits for the people of Detroit?
Well, right now there's a couple of bills that are coming through the House for that deal with environmental justice and environmental legislation, environmental justice. Um, but and there are several. What I'll do is I'll get those to you. Members are introducing bills on a fast and furious basis right now. So I'll get those to you. But the biggest thing right now is, you may recall, President Biden has issued an executive order to ensure, one, there's an African American man who's in charge of the EPA. That's the first time that's ever happened.
Yeah, and
Number two,
I just want to add, I loved that because he actually grew up in an environment where he was living right next to a facility that produced a lot of pollution. So I love that someone's in there who actually has these experiences.
right, exactly. So that's key. And then the other thing is, okay, now back, I can see myself again. So you've got that happening. You've got this African American who's in charge of environment of the EPA. And and so what I'll do is I'll get a list of those bills that are moving forward. But the thing about legislation is, you got to see which bill is going to move. There are lots of bills that are going to deal with environmental justice. Indeed, my former boss, Carolyn Kilpatrick, and also John Lewis used to introduce legislation that dealt with environmental justice all the time. What's going to happen in all likelihood is, because President Biden has made that one of his priorities. I mean, it doesn't get much higher than a priority in which he signed 7 executive orders dealing with environmental justice. And also you have an African American in the top of environmental justice. Um, so I'll get those bills back to you. I'll get those to Hillary and they can be distributed. They're coming along a lot. And the new Congress is only is less than a month old. So, so I'll get that to you.
Awesome, thank you. That was the only question in the chat. If anyone else has a question, feel free to ask it. But
Absolutely.
I think you covered most of it.
Oh, thank you. And again, I appreciate the time. I appreciate everyone taking the time to listen and hear. And, again, Congress there are lots of things that are unprecedented about this Congress. I mean, we've got the second impeachment, but, one thing I just want to leave with all of you is that is your vote matters. Votes matter. Votes are important. And so that's one thing I just want to make. If you do nothing else, just because you can't do everything doesn't mean you can't do something. So do what you can. At the very least you can do is to vote.
For
That's
sure.
such a powerful message. James, one more, I guess, request from us. I love your point about positive reinforcement and just continuing to communicate with our representatives. If there's anything that comes up that we can do to send that positive reinforcement, we're happy to distribute that to our members. That's one of the things that I think this organization can do, is we can kind of streamline that and say, like, hey, thank you for voting this way. And with your expertise, that would be great. And that would be a great way to help us push on some of these issues as well. And I know that you said a lot was happening right now around the Pell Grants and stuff like that. So,
Right.
thinking about meeting with lawmakers later this spring, it almost might be too late for some of that. So let us know if there's anything we can help with in putting some of our students, up front and center while we're pushing for, especially for education. Let us know how we can help with that.
Right. Yeah, no problem. I mean, with regard to the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, that in all likelihood will not begin until the fall or this time next year. Remember, Congress, a lot of things are pushed off because, the previous administration didn't give 100% access to the incoming administration. And it typically takes a new administration 5 to 6 months to get up and running in all of the agencies and positions. So there's time, and I'm in contact with the Higher Education and Labor Committee in the House, where higher education reauthorization is going to start. So I will be in the number one thing, and my colleague Elizabeth Cutter said this when she was on. it's one thing for me to come in and say, hey, I think, we need to increase Pell Grants, but it's another thing for, Ms. Borg, Mr. Say, Mr. Singh, for you all to say, we need to increase Pell Grants because then I can buy a house, I can buy a car, and I can contribute to the economy instead of paying back these loans. So, yeah.
For sure, agreed. We had a couple more questions pop in the chat. Maya B was asking, is there anything coming up that fosters health, such as physical activity for children, affecting and improving the build environment and access to activity centers in the Detroit area?
That I don't know. The answer to that is I don't know if there are. I do know, as you know, the under Obama, there were lots of legislation and lots of initiatives that were done by executive order because the first lady made that a key thing. Let's move.
Mhm.
So the answer is I don't know. I can certainly look that up and get that back to you. I hope they are. But you know what? This is how legislation gets started. I know you think it's corny, and maybe you saw it on I'm Just a Bill. Somebody will call, Brenda Lawrence's office. That we need a bill out here to make sure kids are doing exercise. Or we need money out here so that what happened to recess and all those sort of things. And that's really how these things get started, and it goes from one to another. So I'll look them up and I'll send the answers back to Hillary. And if the answer is no, you know what? That's where you step up and step out. That's it.
For sure. Thank you. And then Mike was asking, is there a website that is consistently updated with concise explanations of legislation currently being discussed in Congress?
Yeah, there's several. One is this place called Legislate, LEGISLATE.com. There's another called, if you go to house.gov and go
Mhm.
to the legislative section, that will tell you what's going on. And really, even though I'm on the Hill, I'll go to house.gov because there it shows you what's on the floor, what's being considered, and what's happening. There are so many bills that get introduced in Congress in a 2-year cycle, and each Congress is a 2-year cycle. This is the 117th session of Congress. Oh, on a typical session of Congress, over 6,000 bills get introduced. Less than 2% get signed into law. So, it's important that, so don't get overwhelmed. What I think you need to do is to focus on your issue and on a committee and just follow those committees. But I'll send those to Hillary as well.
For sure. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And just so you guys know, we will send all those resources out to you in an email. So just make sure you're on our email list. But if you're already here, you obviously are. So awesome. And then Dr. Lori Powell had a question. How important are calls to our representatives/senators on issues that we know that they support? Should we call to thank them, tell them we support their votes? Does this have impact?
Absolutely. Let me tell you, when I worked on the Hill before email was invented. Every day when I worked, we got 3 bundles of mail about letters, may not be able to see about a foot high. And those members of Congress treat those letters as gold. Because what a letter tells you is somebody sat down, wrote on a people's paper or typed out a letter, got the address, put a stamp on it, walked to the post office and sent the letter in because I am interested in this position or I want to support you for it. Now there are emails and phone calls. Those are valuable because I can't tell you, even though, emails were kind of, new toward the end of my Hill career, which ended in 2011. My every boss I had would say, hey, what are you hearing from my constituents on healthcare reform? What are you hearing about my constituents on bailing out the auto industry? What are you hearing from my constituents on this or whatever? And it doesn't even have to be constituents. What are people saying about this? Is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? And that goes in significantly into the matrix of what a member determines whether or not to support or oppose something. Now, indeed, sometimes members don't vote the way their constituents would like for them to vote, but it depends on the issue. But those letters, phone calls, and emails are significant. And if I may add one thing, it's in the things that my slides. Um, if you want to, there's email, but if you mail a letter, because there's so few letters coming to Congress these days, if you get a letter, oh my goodness, what's this? Open it up, take it, and sometimes we'll run around, look, somebody wrote us a letter instead of it's an email. I'm telling you, that's what happens. So
That's a great point. That is a great
so that's
point.
it. If you can, send a letter, and and you'll get someone, and someone will write you back.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much. Those are all the questions. I just want to thank you again on behalf of SciPol Detroit for joining us today. And I just think you are so inspirational, and we will definitely see you again in the near future with our best trainings and whatnot. But just thank you again.
Sure,
Yes,
we
no
have
problem.
one more question if you
Okay,
want.
sure.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely.
I can read it out loud.
Okay.
This one might be long, so if you have access to it in the chat, it might be easier to look at it. But I'll read it out loud.
Okay.
This is from Adelinda. I was wondering what your thoughts are on extreme conservative members of Congress trying to block progressive change. For example, I see how with the COVID bills, there is a lot of time being taken by the Biden administration to try to make the bills bipartisan, which the Obama administration also did, arguably giving in way too much to the GOP administration.
Right.
Even certain things can be passed rather quickly due to the Democratic majority in the Senate. They're still trying to make bipartisan efforts.
Right.
So
Okay. I get the question. And I think I saw the quick follow-up why things take a long time. So let me say this. With regard to the first, what I do, and I can only speak for myself as working for all of you on behalf of Wayne State, it goes back to the slide that I showed you about the Congressional Black Caucus. No permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. How do I work with those individuals? Let me give you a great example. So the tax and jobs bill that was under the previous administration, it was one of the big bills pushing forward, had several provisions that were particularly onerous to students and to universities and research universities. Sometimes it's like we saw that boulder coming down the hill. My job is to at least slow it down. So the answer to that question is twofold. One, my permanent interest is what I've always said, to ensure that students have more access to education. If I can make this bill less dangerous, then that's what I'm going to do, because ultimately it's going to be signed into law. And I also know that I have to work with these individuals at some point on something going forward. So my strategy is the same. I take my personal hat off and I put on my professional Wayne State hat. I'm still dealing with them in a professional manner. I tell them the truth. I'm honest. I stick with the facts. Now, I tell people all the time, members of Congress can lie to you, staff can lie to you, but that's on them. My reputation is my personal reputation, and also the reputation of Wayne State and all of you. I can't go in there saying something that I know is patently false. That is never going to happen. I'm going to stick with the truth, and I'm also going to fight for access to education. And so we were able to slow that train down significantly, namely in making them less onerous, in many cases getting them wiped off of the piece of legislation, and also they're going to expire this year. So that's a great thing. So that's how I deal with them. And it's tough. Sometimes as an African-American man, I'm going into some of these offices and I'm seeing the Confederate flag flying. I'm seeing all these things, but I have to put my personal, it's again, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. And why do things take a long time? Because that's Congress. That's how this place has been for 243 years. You all are probably familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was signed into law in 1991, I think 1992. That bill was originally introduced by by one of the founders of the Congressional Black Caucus, Ron Dellums, in 1971. It wasn't signed into law until 1991. So, that's what I said. When you do these things, it's kind of like what my grandfather said. This is a fight. And Mr. Lewis, this isn't the fight of a day, a week, or a month. This is a fight of a lifetime. What you do is kind of like a relay race. I run the baton and I'm passing it off. And sometimes you run the baton and you pass it off. The first civil rights bill that was signed into law was passed in 1866. It got repealed by the Supreme Court in 1869. There were 20 civil rights laws that were passed in between, but the real civil rights law didn't get passed until 1964. To this day, over 209 bills against lynching have been filed. Not a single bill has been signed into law against lynching, and this is 2021. So you have to look at the long picture, but you have to understand progress sometimes is one step at a time. It's like my grandfather used to say, as long as you're taking a step forward, you're not standing in the same place. That's how it's always been.
Yeah, great perspective, and I definitely agree with you. We're in it for the long run. Even with Cy Paul Detroit and these action groups, you can't expect change overnight. It's going to take time and dedication, just like how James has dedicated his life to pieces of legislation, as well as the late Mr. Lewis. So yeah, we just have to keep that in mind and not only do it for ourselves if it's affecting us, but others as well. So thank you so much again. And we will send out your information to our members, and they can connect with you if they have any
Absolutely.
legislation.
Thank you. I'll be 61 in 7 days. So when I'm 91, any doctors out there, I expect y'all coming by to see me at
Yes,
the old folks home.
you do not look 61 though. I will tell you that, not at all.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
And before everyone else leaves, we just want to quickly remind you that in 2 weeks, February 25th, our BEST training will begin, and we will have that with VP Patrick. And these are really important if you guys want to meet with lawmakers. So make sure you mark those in your calendars. And thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure to screenshot this agenda for all future events, and especially for those BEST trainings. We have an upcoming panel on air pollution, as well as we'll be seeing James again April 29th. So make sure you put it in your calendars. Thank you everyone for joining. And everyone's thanking you in the chat, James, if you can't see.
Thank you. Thank you very much.